everything was going so well. You see, in November of 2020, I was able to get Dylan and Jacob back into Ethalonia, and I was surprisingly quickly able to get them some Ethalonian citizenship, because in that country, as long as you go through customs and like fill out the paperwork and you are who you say you are, they give you citizenship kind of easy. Just as long as you go through customs and again you are who you say you are. And then after that I went through the process of adopting them. But since Mia was their aunt, it really wasn't that hard to adopt them. And then on January 7th, 2021, yes, the day after January 6th, 2021, but on January 7th, 2021, our daughter, Rose Upshur, was born. Yeah, at about 10 or 11 a.m. It was kind of weird, but it was a good day nonetheless. And on that day, I was married and had 2 adopted teenagers and a baby. Wow. I had a very strange family. But other than that, it was perfect. Until, you see, it was about February 4th or 5th. Our daughter was only about 4 weeks old, and yeah, she was at the stage where she did cry a little bit, and well, at first she cried like real soft when we brought her home, but then when she was about a week or 2 old, she started crying a lot more. But interestingly enough, after this whole event, she didn't really cry that much after that. But anyway, it was about February 4th or 5th. I don't remember too well. It was at night, and Rose was crying again. And Jake was up late playing video games, and Dylan was trying to sleep. You know, he had that pillow over his head trying to block out Rose's crying. So me and Mia, we had decided we really wanted to be good co-parents. So, you know, we bundled up Rose and we put her in her stroller and we started walking outside. You know, sometimes when Rose couldn't sleep, me and Mia would just take walks outside with her. And we would talk. And yeah, it was a little bit scary going out at night. But we lived in a good neighborhood. And also, it was kind of post-COVID. So it was February of 2021. So we were just now coming out of quarantine. So anyway, we were walking near the house, me and Mia were, and I still remember what we were talking about. I said, so, Mia, you know what we do for a living, right? And she said, well, yes, Ethan, I know what we do for a living. And I said, okay, well, in about a month, you're going to have to come back from maternity leave, and I'm going to go back to working at Umbrella with you now that this, it's looking like we're going to come out of quarantine, you know? But going forward, doing what we do, going in all these dangerous places, do you really think it's a good idea to keep doing that, now that we have the baby? You think that's a good idea? And she said, well, I don't know. But it's looking like Jake really wants to join Umbrella to help us, and it looks like an interesting job for him. And Dylan, he's just so good with kids. So I really trust Dylan as the babysitter. So for right now, I don't really think we have anything to worry about. And I said, okay. But it's still pretty dangerous, and you can call me a pansy all you want, but I like staying home with Rose. And she said, oh, okay, Ethan, okay, I understand that. But there's still some corrupt organizations we have to deal with. There are still supernatural threats that we have to take care of, Ethan. And so I just said, you know what? You're right, Mia. I guess I can't really argue with you on that. So anyway, I noticed that you were making some soup when you get home. What kind of soup is that again? And then out of nowhere, I hear a poof, and then I heard a sound come from Mia's mouth, and then I saw of a little burst of blood come from her shoulder, and her eyes went wide, and she fell back onto her back against the sidewalk. And then I ran to Mia, screaming, Mia, are you okay? And then I heard these two men in black suits, and they had black hoods on. But I noticed something distinctive about them. They were wearing these dangly wooden necklaces, and they were wearing what appeared, the necklace design is what appeared to be like a shaggy goat. They were wearing necklaces of what appeared to be a shaggy goat. Like they had a necklace with a goat design on them. And they were wearing black robes with black hoods. And then one of the guys went for Rose, and he grabbed the stroller and started pushing it away. And so I sprung up, ready to fight, and then one of the guys slammed the Glock right into my forehead. And then he started just hitting me over and over. And then he pointed the gun right at Mia. And then I grabbed his arm and then I gripped really hard, so hard that it must have almost broken his arm off. He screamed, let go of the gun, and then punched me in the side of the head and ran. And he ran off with my daughter. I thank God that I was carrying my phone, because I called 911, and then I was plugging up Mia's wound with my hand, and she said, Ethan, call Chris from work. And I knew that Chris was one of her coworkers in the Umbrella Corps, and I called him, and he was down there almost as soon as the ambulance was. The ambulance was there about 10 minutes later to pick up Mia and take her to the hospital, but I had to stay behind and talk to Chris, as well as the police. The police were there too. And then a police officer was talking to me about what had happened, about, this guy had shot my wife and then kidnapped my daughter. And then the police officer said, "Well, wearing a black hood and black robes, that's not really a lot to go off of. Did you see maybe the color of their skin or any features?" And I said, yeah, I noticed that their hands, they were real pale, like pale, like really pale, like white as snow or paper, stuff like that. Yeah, their hands were really pale, and they were cold too. And he said, okay. Anything else, like tattoos or jewelry? And I said, now that you mention it, I remember they both were wearing these necklaces of goats, like shaggy horned goats, like goat necklaces. And then Chris immediately interjected and said, "Wait a minute, hold on. Did you say like they had necklaces? They were wearing a necklace with a wooden goat attached to it?" And I said, "Yeah, they were." And he said, and Chris said, "Oh no, Ethan, after you're done talking to the police, you gotta talk to me." And I said, "Okay." So after I got done giving my statement to the police, I walked over to Chris and said, "What? Okay, Chris, what is it?" And he started getting out his phone, and then he pulled up a picture of these strange, what appeared to be cultists in black robes, and they were wearing the same goat necklaces that I was talking about. And I said, those are the necklaces that I saw. Yeah, those look like the guys." And he said, oh no, Ethan, oh no." And I said, "Oh no, what's going on?" And he said, "Ethan, I think Rose was kidnapped by an organization." And I said, "Wait, an organization? What, who?" And he said, "I think they were kidnapped by well, the guys that shot Mia and kidnapped Rose, they were hired by a woman named Miranda Eugenic." And I thought, Eugenic? Where do I know that name? Oh, wait, I remembered. Dr. Eugenic was the guy that gave me the serum that did give me a healing factor and strength. But he also performed all those illegal experiments back at St. Stephen's. And I said, "Oh, great, dealing with this guy again." And he said, "Yep, well, Dr. Eugenic, he had a daughter named Miranda. And Miranda idolized her dad. And while you killed Dr. Eugenic, she was studying at a university in France. And then, after that, she earned her bachelor's degree in science, and then in biology, to be exact. And then after that, she went to Germany to study at the University of Ingolstadt. And afterwards, she got her master's degree in biology. And then she moved to this weird village up in the Bavarian Alps of Germany. And, well, she set up this strange lab, and she had the villagers there do her bidding. And the symbol of her lab is a brown, shaggy goat with horns. That is her symbol. And also, she's into weird experiments involving babies. She experiments with babies. And then it all came back to me, and I remembered, and I said, oh my God, I know why she did this. She took my baby away so she could do experiments on Rose to get revenge on me for killing her dad. Like father, like daughter. And I said, okay, alright, where is this village? And he said, well, it's in this remote area of the Bavarian Alps in Germany. And I said, alright, okay, well, call Umbrella Air, because I'm going to Germany. I'm going right now. And right then, right there, I started packing my bags. And then Chris came in to explain to Jake and Dylan what had happened. And just then, I heard Jake say, okay, I am going to volunteer to be in the Umbrella Corps with you. I want to make sure that this doesn't happen to any more families. I have to stop this. And Dylan, with his softer voice, said, yeah, I think I'm going with my brother on this one. I want to join too. And Chris said, all right, but there is quite a bit of training involved. And it's a very dangerous job. Are you sure about this? Because once you go, you can't go back. And they said yes. But they had to go to training at the Umbrella Training Academy. Now, I've already told you what training was like at the Umbrella Training Academy, and no, I was not about to go with them because I had to pack my bags and get on one of Umbrella's jets and fly right to Germany. And sure enough, the very next day, I was very jet-lagged, but I was in Munich, Germany the next day. And then a few hours after that, I was on a black Umbrella SUV traveling right into the Bavarian Alps. That night, I approached a command post that Umbrella had set up. And I was wearing, my jeans. And I was also wearing a pair of light snow boots. And I also was wearing a black sweatshirt with my old familiar green jacket on top of it to really keep me warm. And then I said, alright, okay, give me the stuff, I'm ready. And I decided to not wear my big blue snow jacket because, well, the Bavarian Alps, they were cold, but not nearly as cold as that night on Mount God about 6 years ago. And so they gave me a service pistol, and they also gave me a smaller rifle. It was like a .22 rifle. And they had also given me a combat knife. And they also gave me a radio. And then Chris said, Alright, Ethan. I'm going to be on the radio the whole time. Now, we are a little bit hesitant to send in backup there. The reason why is because this is a civilian village. There are lots of innocent people there, and we really don't want to make a scene. But you have to get through there, and you have to find this organization and find Miranda Eugenic, kill her, and then take your daughter back. Is that understood?" And I said, "Yeah, loud and clear." And so they outfitted me with a little flashlight, and then I took my guns and I started walking through that cold forest with a thin layer of snow. It was so quiet and dark and on edge in that little forest that all I could hear was the gentle crushing of snow as I walked through. And on the ground, as I approached this strange cabin, I noticed blood. And I noticed that the blood was coming from crows. As I saw the crow corpses on the ground. And I don't know why, I was just relieved that it wasn't coming from humans or, well, yeah, mostly humans. And then I saw it. The strange, like German Alp themed, like German Alp style cabin. And I opened the door, and might I say, what a wreck. There were things turned over, like desks and cabinets turned over, and lamps were on the ground, and it looked like there was a really big struggle. And so I walked through the cabin, and I noticed there were claw marks on the ground, and little puddles of blood. And so I exited through the back door of that cabin, and I raised my black .22 rifle and kept walking through the woods. And then I was on some ridge, and then I could see in the early morning daylight, it had to have been like 6:45 or 7 in the morning at this point, and I noticed in the purplish, grayish light of the early morning, I saw a collection of houses that led into a church, a couple of barns, a couple of fields, a cemetery, and far up on the hill, a big castle. And I thought right then and right there, what the fuck did I get myself into? But I knew I couldn't go back. I was already past the point of no return. I had to save Rose. So I walked through, and then I approached the nearest house on the outskirts of the village. And I noticed this big black mass, and I got close to it, and I realized it was a blanket, and underneath the blanket I could see big horse hooves and fresh blood in the snow. And I noticed that this house had a little barn attached to it. It was almost as if they were like Amish, so to speak. And so I gently pushed open the side door of the house, and I stepped in, and of course it was all disordered. And I noticed that there was what used to be a couch, but it was just absolutely destroyed. Cotton was everywhere, and it had just been carnage and just cut open. That poor couch had just been eviscerated. And there were claw marks all over the tables. And I continued my exploration through this house. And then I heard something drop in the kitchen. I walked in, and then I noticed that there was a little room, what appeared to be a closet or a pantry in that kitchen. And then I used my flashlight, and I noticed that there were feet underneath that curtain. And then I raised my gun and I said, "Alright, come out. I'm not gonna hurt you as long as you just..." And then I quickly felt the need to run out of the way, and then pow, there was a loud gunshot. And then I raised my rifle, and then an old man in jeans and a brown jacket walked out, and he looked just as scared as I was. And he said, "Oh, I thought you were one of them." And I said, "One of them? One of what? One of what?" And he said, "It's good you have done, because there are some bad things going on in this village. You need to leave. You have made a big mistake coming here." And then, I heard a big crash, and I heard the window smash, and then I heard all this wood break, and then something big had just pounced onto this old man, and then it just took him down instantly, and I knew within a few seconds he was dead. That thing had just sliced his arteries in his neck. And then I noticed what was on top of him. It's what appeared, it had a lot of hair, and it was very hairy. It had just hair coming out in all different areas of its body, and it had big arms and very strong legs and a big back, and it had tattered gray clothing. In fact, I wondered why it even bothered wearing that tattered gray clothing when it was February in the mountains and there was snow outside. So I raised my rifle and I fired, and the bullet went right through that thing's back, and it howled, but it wasn't a howl like you hear in the media like wolves do. It was a it felt more like a roar. And then that thing stood up, and it had a very roundish square face, and it had a gray fur all over its body. And, well, I guess I should just not waste any time at all and say it was a werewolf. And it came towards me, and I shot right at its chest again. And then it screamed, put its arms up towards the heavens, and fell. Man, what the fuck had I gotten myself into? And so I exited that house, and then I looked around, and then I heard something dragging across the snow, and then I quickly looked, and I saw what appeared to be legs being dragged across the ground, and so I chased it, and then sure enough, I saw, crouched to the ground, another one of those things dragging away a body. And then out of nowhere, I felt something big on my back, and then I felt those claws dig into my shoulders and pull me back and then throw me on the ground. And then I held up my hands in defense, and then that thing had bit me right in my hand. I howled in pain, and it nearly swallowed my wedding ring. And then, with the strength that Dr. Eugenic had thankfully given me, I mustered my strength and punched it right in the side of the neck. And it came off. And then I quickly grabbed my service pistol and emptied part of my mag into that beast. and it collapsed. And I looked at my hand, and I noticed how there were big bite marks, gushing blood in my hand. But the blood became slower and slower, and the wound just got smaller and smaller, and then eventually just left 4 big scars on my hand. And then the sun started to come up, and I knew this day was only beginning. And then I called Chris over the radio and I said, okay, yeah, I think I'm going to need some backup.